The elderly black man shuffled into the courtroom in handcuffs, his weathered face downcast. "Name?" the clerk asked. He answered in a trembling voice. "Marcus Johnson, Sergeant First Class, United States Army Special Forces." No one expected what happened next. Marcus Johnson, 65, sat on the courtroom bench, his shoulders slumped beneath a faded military jacket 2 sizes too large. The harsh fluorescent lights accentuated deep lines carved by time and hardship across his once proud face. Decades ago, he'd stood tall in dress greens, medals gleaming on his chest. Today, he waited for judgment in clothes acquired from a shelter donation bin. The bailiff called his case number, docket 47B, City versus Marcus Johnson. Disturbance of peace, trespassing, resisting arrest. Marcus shuffled forward, his movement stiff from arthritis and old injuries that had never properly healed. Vietnam first, then Iraq for his second tour. Wounds visible and invisible, all carried silently through the decades since. Judge Samantha Wilson, a stern white woman in her 50s, peered down at the file before her. Her reputation for being particularly harsh with repeat offenders was well known throughout the county courthouse. "Mr. Johnson," began the prosecutor, a young white man with perfect teeth in a tailored suit, "has been repeatedly warned about loitering behind the Jefferson Street Cafe. The owner has filed 3 complaints this month alone." What the prosecutor didn't mention was that Marcus had only been sitting quietly near the cafe's dumpster, warming himself by the kitchen exhaust vent on particularly cold nights. He never panhandled, never bothered customers, just sought a moment's warmth when December temperatures plunged below freezing. Officer James Reynolds, who had made the arrest, testified next, found the defendant behind the cafe at 11:45 p.m. He refused to vacate the premises when instructed. Marcus hadn't refused. He'd simply asked for 5 more minutes to finish the half sandwich the cook had secretly given him. But arguing seemed pointless now, as it had then. "Your Honor," the prosecutor continued, "this is a defendant's 3rd citation this year. We recommend community service and a 30-day no trespass order for the downtown business district. A no trespass order would mean no access to the shelter on 4th Street, the only warm bed Marcus had known in months. It would mean no meals at St. Luke's Church on Tuesdays and Thursdays. It would mean true isolation in the coldest part of winter." Judge Wilson studied Marcus over her reading glasses, her gaze lingering on his worn military jacket. Something unreadable flickered across her stern features. "Mr. Johnson," Judge Wilson addressed him directly, "do you have representation today?" Marcus shook his head. The public defender assigned him had been called to another courtroom for an emergency hearing. "Would you like to make a statement on your own behalf?" the judge asked. Marcus cleared his throat, his voice rusty from disuse. "No excuses, Your Honor. Just trying to stay warm." "Any particular reason you chose that location?" the judge pressed. "The cook, Jimmy, sometimes leaves food. Known him since he was a kid. His father served with me in Desert Storm." "And your military service?" Judge Wilson asked, though this information wasn't typically relevant in such proceedings. "United States Army, 1975 to 1995. Sergeant First Class, 5th Special Forces Group in Iraq." The words came automatically, a moment of clarity and pride amid confusion. The judge made a note, then continued reviewing the file. Something in Marcus's personnel record seemed to catch her attention. Before she could speak again, the courtroom doors opened. A distinguished black man in an expensive suit entered, approaching the public defender's table. He placed a leather briefcase down and addressed the court. "Your Honor, Alexander Roberts for the defendant. I apologize for the interruption, but I've been retained to represent Mr. Johnson." Marcus looked up in confusion. He hadn't called anyone. Couldn't afford a lawyer, especially not one with a suit that expensive. "This is highly irregular, Mr. Roberts," Judge Wilson noted. "The court was not informed of this representation." "It's a very recent development, Your Honor," Roberts replied smoothly. "I would request a brief recess to confer with my client." Judge Wilson studied the lawyer, then Marcus, her expression unreadable. "The court will take a 15-minute recess," she announced, rising suddenly. As she disappeared into her chambers, Marcus turned to the stranger beside him. "I don't have money for a lawyer." "You don't need any," Roberts replied quietly. "The firm of Williams, Roberts, and Wilson is handling your case pro bono." Marcus frowned at the familiar name. "Wilson? Like the judge." "Exactly like the judge," Roberts confirmed. In her chambers, Judge Samantha Wilson removed her glasses with trembling hands. 20 years on the bench had taught her to maintain composure regardless of what appeared before her court, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. "It can't be the same man," she whispered to herself, though the details aligned too perfectly. She unlocked her desk drawer and removed a worn photograph. Herself as a young woman standing beside her brother, Lieutenant Michael Wilson, in his Army dress uniform. His arm was around her shoulders, both smiling widely at his commissioning ceremony. Michael's last letter home from Iraq sat beside the photo, the paper thin from countless readings. In it, he described a firefight outside Baghdad where his unit had been pinned down by insurgent fire. "If not for Sergeant Johnson," Michael had written, "none of us would have made it out. He ran across open ground under heavy fire to reach fallen soldiers, then provided covering fire so we could evacuate our wounded." 2 weeks after writing that letter, Michael had been killed by an IED. Samantha remembered the military funeral, the folded flag presented to her parents, and the black soldier who had approached him afterward. "Your son saved my life," he'd said. "I was the one he pulled to safety." The soldier hadn't finished the sentence. Didn't need to. That soldier's name had been Marcus Johnson. Samantha had tried contacting him after the funeral, wanted to hear more about her brother's final days, but the military had explained that Sergeant Johnson had been deployed again immediately. Later inquiries revealed he'd been honorably discharged after suffering severe PTSD and a traumatic brain injury during his final tour. And now, 20 years later, he sat in her courtroom, homeless, alone, and unrecognized. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Alexander Roberts entered, his expression concerned. "Samantha, what's going on?" he asked. As her late husband's former law partner and family friend, he was one of few people who addressed her by first name. "It's him, Alex," she replied, gesturing to the photograph. "The soldier who saved Michael, the one who carried Michael out under fire after he was wounded." Roberts's eyes widened as he connected the dots. "The homeless veteran in your courtroom, is that Marcus Johnson? The one you've been trying to locate for years?" Samantha nodded. His service record confirms it. Baghdad, 2004. Same unit as Michael. Awarded the Silver Star for the action Michael described in his letters. "Does he know who you are?" "I don't think so. I married Thomas after law school, changed my name to Wilson, and it's been 20 years. She paused, collecting herself. "What happened to him, Alex? How does a decorated Green Beret end up homeless and in my courtroom for trying to stay warm?" Roberts shook his head. "From what I could gather in our brief conversation, he suffered from severe PTSD after his final tour. His wife left while he was deployed. VA benefits got tangled in bureaucracy. He worked construction for years until injuries from his service made physical labor impossible. The rest followed the typical pattern: job loss, foreclosure, and eventually the streets." Samantha closed her eyes, remembering her brother's words. "Johnson is the best of us, the kind who would give everything for his soldiers without a second thought. If I'm half the officer he is as an NCO, I'll consider myself successful." "What are you going to do?" Roberts asked gently. "You could recuse yourself." "No," Samantha replied firmly. "I'm not letting him slip away again." When Judge Wilson returned to the courtroom, her posture was impeccable, her expression neutral. Yet those who knew her well might have noticed a slight tremor in her hands as she arranged papers before her. "Mr. Roberts, has your client decided how he wishes to proceed?" she asked formally. The attorney stood. "Your Honor, we request dismissal of all charges. My client was simply seeking shelter from dangerously cold conditions, a basic human necessity. Furthermore, we can demonstrate that Mr. Johnson had implied permission from restaurant employees to be on the premises." The prosecutor began to object, but Judge Wilson raised her hand slightly, silencing him before ruling. "I have several questions for the defendant." She turned her attention to Marcus. Mr. Johnson, your military record indicates service in Baghdad during 2004. Is that correct? Marcus straightened slightly, muscle memory from decades of military bearing briefly overcoming his current condition. Yes, Your Honor, 5th Special Forces Group. And on April 17th, 2004, were you involved in an operation near the western outskirts of the city? Confusion crossed Marcus's weathered face. Yes, ma'am. We were escorting a convoy when we came under heavy fire. During that engagement, the judge continued, her voice remarkably steady, did you rescue a wounded soldier, a Lieutenant Michael Wilson, while under enemy fire? The courtroom fell silent. Marcus's eyes narrowed, memories visibly washing over him. Lieutenant Wilson, he repeated slowly. Yes, young officer. Good man. He was hit, trying to reach wounded soldiers. Marcus's eyes grew distant. I got to him, pulled him behind a wall. He kept telling me to leave him, to get the others out first. In the gallery, a silver-haired black man in a Veterans of Foreign Wars jacket leaned forward suddenly, intent on the proceedings. And what happened to Lieutenant Wilson? Judge Samantha Wilson asked, her professional mask firmly in place despite the tumble beneath. We got him to medevac, Marcus replied, his voice dropping. I heard later he made it home. Then a few weeks after, he was on patrol again. His vehicle hit an IED. Marcus's voice cracked slightly. All these years I've wondered if I'd done more damage than good, getting him out only for him to die later. The silver-haired veteran in the gallery stood up, unable to contain himself. That's him, he announced loudly. That's Sergeant Johnson. I was there that day. He saved 6 of us. Judge Wilson struck her gavel once, sharply. Order, she commanded, though her voice lacked its usual authoritativeness. The courtroom quieted, tension humming in the air. Marcus stared at the floor, uncomfortable with the sudden attention. The silver-haired veteran remained standing, defiant. Your Honor, the prosecutor interjected. While Mr. Johnson's military service is admirable, it has no bearing on. The court disagrees. Judge Wilson interrupted. It has every bearing. She set her gavel down deliberately. This court will take a 10-minute recess. Bailiff, please ensure Mr. Johnson remains in the courtroom. As she rose to leave, she paused, making unprecedented eye contact with the defendant. Mr. Johnson, when I return, there are matters beyond these charges we need to discuss. In her chambers once more, Samantha's professional composure finally cracked. She pressed trembling fingers against her lips, suppressing emotions that had waited 2 decades for release. After several deep breaths, she reached for her phone. Colonel Matthews? Samantha Wilson. Yes, I know it's been years. Listen, I need a favor, and I need it immediately. When Judge Wilson returned exactly 10 minutes later, she was not alone. Behind her walked 3 uniformed soldiers, a full colonel, a master sergeant, and a corporal carrying a polished wooden case. The courtroom stirred, whispers racing through the gallery. Marcus Johnson stood reflexively at the sight of the uniforms, muscle memory overriding his physical discomfort. Judge Wilson took her seat and faced the crowded room. For the first time in her judicial career, she removed her glasses completely, setting them aside to address the court not as a judge but as a human being. Before proceeding, I must disclose a matter of personal connection to this case, she began. The Lieutenant Michael Wilson, mentioned by the defendant, was my brother. A wave of murmurs swept the courtroom. Marcus's eyes widened, recognition and confusion battling across his face. 20 years ago, my brother wrote to our family about a sergeant who saved his life in Baghdad, a man who ran through enemy fire to reach him after he was wounded, and who provided covering fire so others could reach safety. Her voice remained remarkably steady. That man was Sergeant Marcus Johnson. The silver-haired veteran from the gallery called out, "It's true, Your Honor, I was there." Johnson got hit twice, pulling the lieutenant to cover. Judge Wilson nodded acknowledgement. 2 weeks after that incident, my brother was killed in action. At his funeral, several soldiers approached our family to share stories of Michael's courage, but also to tell us about the sergeant who had saved him during that earlier firefight, giving our family 2 more weeks with Michael that we wouldn't otherwise have had. She looked directly at Marcus now. After my brother's death, I tried to locate you, Sergeant Johnson. The Army informed me you'd been redeployed immediately. Years later, they told me you had been discharged, but couldn't share your location. Marcus stood perfectly still, his weathered face a mask of conflicting emotions. I never stopped looking, Judge Wilson continued. And now, by what can only be described as fate or divine intervention, you appear in my courtroom. She gestured to Colonel, who stepped forward. Colonel James Matthews was my brother's commanding officer. He has something to say. Colonel Matthews approached the bench. Sergeant Johnson, the Army has been attempting to locate you for several years. Your file was among thousands flagged for review under the Veterans Reconsideration Initiative. New information came to light regarding your service in Iraq and Afghanistan that warranted reassessment of your decorations and benefit status. The corporal stepped forward, opening the wooden case he carried. Inside gleamed a medal on a blue ribbon. By order of the Secretary of the Army, and in recognition of conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action on April 17, 2004, the Distinguished Service Cross is hereby awarded to Sergeant First Class Marcus L. Johnson, United States Army. A shocked murmur rippled through the courtroom. The Distinguished Service Cross, second only to the Medal of Honor. Intelligence that remained classified until recently confirmed that your actions that day not only saved Lieutenant Wilson and 5 other soldiers, but disrupted an ambush that would have likely destroyed the entire convoy, Colonel Matthews explained. Your Silver Star has been upgraded accordingly. 11. Interaction Guidance, 50 words. Some heroes save others from death, but spend a lifetime with no one to save them from being forgotten. Honor doesn't require glory. Sometimes just a moment of recognition is enough to help someone stand tall again. Comment respect to show you stand with our veterans. Subscribe for more stories that touch the heart